Welcome back to the deep dive. We are cracking open Lippincott illustrated reviews, microbiology again today, and we've arrived at chapter 25.
Which covers the enveloped DNA viruses.
And I have to say, reading through this chapter, the stakes felt a lot higher than some of our previous discussions. We aren't just talking about a passing flu here.
Cool.
We are talking about viruses that, once they get into your system, they essentially move in for life.
That is the headline for this chapter. We are dealing with Herpesviridae and Poxviridae. These are the heavy hitters. And you're right, the defining, the psychological feature of the herpes family is latency.
Right.
It changes the way you think about infection. It's not an event, it's a relationship.
A pretty toxic relationship, if you ask me.
Most toxic.
Yeah.
But it's also biologically fascinating.
So our mission today is to break down these two families. We need to understand the machinery, how they replicate, why they are so much more complex than, say, the smaller viruses we've covered.
Right.
We need to map out the three subfamilies of herpes. And finally, we'll tackle the rule breakers, the pox viruses.
Perfect. And just to orient everyone, the text actually lists three families of enveloped DNA viruses, but we are deliberately ignoring hepatitis B for now.
Herpesviridae.
Yep. It's so unique, it gets its own deep dive in chapter 26.
Yeah.
So today, just focus your mind strictly on herpes and pox.
Okay, so let's start with the structure. When I looked at figure 25.2 in the text, the first thing that struck me was the sheer number of layers. This isn't just a genetic code wrapped in a shell, it looks like a jawbreaker.
It is a dense structure. I've heard them called the Swiss Army knives of the viral world. If you look at that diagram, you see the core with the double-stranded DNA, and then the icosahedral capsid, that geometric soccer ball shape.
Okay.
But the real deep dive detail here, the thing that really matters, is the layer between the capsid and the envelope.
The tegument.
The tegument. It's described as this amorphous proteinaceous material, which frankly sounds like a bit of a mess. It might look messy, but it's highly functional. Think of the tegument as like a go bag or a tactical kit.
A tactical
kit.
Yeah.
Most viruses enter a cell and have to wait. They have to hijack the host's machinery to start making their tools. But the herpes virus brings its own tools in the tegument. It carries viral enzymes and transcription factors right inside.
So it hits the ground running. It doesn't have to build the factory. It brings the workers with it.
Exactly. For instance, it brings an RNase that starts shutting down the host's protein synthesis immediately.
Yeah.
It doesn't ask permission. It starts renovating the house the second it walks in the door.
Wow. And that leads to the envelope itself. The text mentions something interesting about where this outer coat comes from. It's not just one membrane, is it?
No, it's a dynamic process. Initially, the virus steals this envelope from the host's nuclear membrane. Because remember, this is a DNI virus. It replicates in the nucleus.
Right.
But as it travels out of the cell, it actually swaps that membrane for one from the Golgi apparatus.
It changes its disguise on the way out.
Essentially, yes. It lets the virus exit the cell without necessarily killing it right away, which is crucial if you want to stay hidden.
Let's talk about that replication process, because this is where the pharmacology comes in. The text describes a cascade control. It sounds like a military operation.
It is. It happens in three distinct waves inside the nucleus. First, you have the immediate early genes. These are the foremen.
Okay.
They produce proteins that regulate and turn on the next wave.
Which are the delayed early genes.
Right. And for any student listening, put a giant mental asterisk here. The delayed early genes code for enzymes involved in DNA synthesis, specifically the viral DNA polymerase. This is the Achilles heel.
Because if we can target that viral enzyme without hitting our own,
we have a drug. That's why we have drugs like acyclovir. We'll get into the mechanism, but just know that this delayed early phase is where the drug war happens.
And then finally, the late genes.
Those are just the structural guys. They build the capsid and the spikes to package up the new virus particles. Once those are built, the cell usually dies. That's the lytic cycle. But as we said, sometimes the virus skips all this and just goes quiet.
Latency.
Latency.
Okay. So we have the machinery. Let's meet the family. The text breaks Herpesviridae into three subfamilies, alpha, beta, and gamma. Let's take them in order.
Alpha, beta, gamma. And like a fraternity, each house has a very distinct personality. The alphas are the aggressive ones.
Right.
They grow fast, they kill cells quickly. That's the cytolytic nature. And they have a very specific hiding spot. Nerve cells.
And this group includes the most famous ones, Herpes Simplex 1 and 2, and Varicella-Zoster.
Correct.
Let's drill down on HSV1 and HSV2. I feel like the public perception is type 1 is cold sores, type 2 is genital herpes. The text says that's mostly true.
It's a useful rule of thumb, but it's dangerous to rely on it 100%. We used to say above the waist for HSV1 and below the waist for HSV2. But because of changing sexual practices, you see more HSV1 in the genital tract and vice versa.
Okay.
However, the biology of where they hide is distinct.
This is the pathway shown in figure 25.6. I found this diagram fascinating because it visualizes the movement. You have the primary infection on the skin, the blister, but the virus doesn't stay there.
No, it enters the sensory nerve endings, right there at the blister, and then it physically travels up the axon of the nerve like a train on a track until it reaches the ganglion.
So for HSV1, that's usually the trigeminal ganglion, which sits right near your ear.
Exactly. And for HSV2, it travels down to the sacral ganglia at the base of the spine.
And once it's there, it just sits.
It becomes an episome. It's just a circular loop of DNA floating in the nucleus of your nerve cell. It's not replicating. It's not killing the cell. It's just waiting.
Waiting for what?
Stress, fever. UV light is a big one for cold sores. Anything that momentarily weakens immune surveillance. Then the virus wakes up, travels back down that same nerve highway, and causes a breakout.
So that explains why people get cold sores in the exact same corner of their mouth every time. It's literally the end of the line for that specific nerve.
Exactly. It's a localized recurrence.
Now, for most people, this is just annoying. But the text highlights some terrifying complications.
No, this isn't just about lip blisters. If HSV1 gets into the eye, you get keratoconjunctivitis. It's a huge cause of corneal blindness. And it goes the other way into the brain.
You get HSV encephalitis, which has a 70% mortality rate if untreated. That is shockingly high.
It is a true medical emergency. It tends to attack the temporal lobe specifically, which can cause these bizarre behavioral changes before coma sets in. It's really frightening.
Wow.
And then, of course, there is neonatal herpes. If a mother has an active primary infection during birth, the transmission rate is huge, 30 to 40%. It can be fatal for the baby.
So how do we spot it? The text mentions syncytia.
Right. If you scrape a lesion and look under a microscope, this is the Zank smear, you see syncytia, which are these giant clumps of fused cells.
I see.
And inside the nuclei, you see Cowdery type A bodies. But honestly, most diagnosis now is done via PCR. It's just faster and more accurate.
Which brings us to the aha moment of the chapter for me, the treatment, the acyclovir. You mentioned earlier it targets the viral DNA polymerase, but looking at figure 25.7, there is a really clever twist. It's a prodrug.
This is elegant pharmacology. Acyclovir is a guanine analog. To the body, it looks like a DNA building block, but on its own, it's completely inert. It's like a bullet without gunpowder.
Okay.
To become active, it needs a phosphate group added to it. It needs to be phosphorylated.
And our human cells don't want to do that.
Human enzymes are terrible at adding that first phosphate to acyclovir. They basically ignore it. But the viral enzyme, thymidine kinase, it's not picky. It grabs the acyclovir and phosphorylates it.
So the virus effectively pulls the pin on the grenade that kills it.
That is the perfect analogy. The virus activates its own killer. Once it's active, the viral DNA polymerase tries to use it to build a new DNA chain. But acyclovir is a dead end.
A chain terminator.
Exactly. It's missing the connection point needed to add the next link. So the DNA chain stops cold, construction halts, the virus can't replicate.
And our uninfected cells are totally fine because they never activated the drug in the first place.
Correct. It's a targeted strike that relies on the virus's own sloppy machinery.
Amazing. Let's finish the alpha group with VZV Varicella-Zoster, chickenpox, and shingles. How is this different from HSV?
Well, the main difference is transmission. HSV requires direct contact. VZV is respiratory.
Oh, right.
You breathe it in, it gets into the blood, that's a viremia, and then it spreads to the skin. That's why chickenpox is all over the body, not just localized.
The text mentions crops of lesions for chickenpox. Figure 25.11 shows this pretty clearly.
That's the board exam keyword. You see lesions in all different stages simultaneously. You have a new red spot here, a fluid-filled blister there, and a crusted scab over there, all at once.
And then, like its cousins, it goes latent in the nerves. But when it comes back as shingles, it looks totally different.
It follows the dermatome.
Walk us through that concept, because figure 25.2 is pretty striking. It's a belt of rash.
A dermatome is a strip of skin that is supplied by a single spinal nerve root. Because the virus is hiding in one specific ganglion, when it reactivates, it only travels down the nerves connected to that ganglion.
So you get this painful line of blisters that wraps around one side of the torso.
And it stops abruptly at the midline.
Right at the spine and the belly button.
Exactly. It never crosses over, because that's where the nerve territory ends. If you see a rash that crosses the midline, it's probably not shingles.
One specific warning in the text regarding children with chickenpox aspirin.
Big red flag. Never give aspirin to a child with a viral fever. It's linked to Rey syndrome, fatty liver, and acute encephalopathy. Brain swelling. It's rare, but it's often fatal.
Good to know. Let's move to the second subfamily, Betaherpesvirinae. The text calls these the slow growers.
These are the cytomegaloviruses, hence the name, CMV. Cyto means cell, megalo means big. They cause the infected cells to swell up.
And if you look under a microscope at figure 25.14, you see that owl's eye.
It's iconic. It's a large inclusion body in the nucleus surrounded by a clear halo. It looks exactly like an owl staring back at you. If you see that image, the answer is CMV.
Who gets this? The text lists transmission routes as, well, basically everything. Saliva, urine, semen, breast milk.
It is everywhere. In fact, most of us listening probably have it. In healthy adults, it's usually asymptomatic, or maybe you feel a bit tired, like a mild mono.
Wow.
But it becomes a monster in two specific populations.
Be immunocompromised and newborns.
Right. In AIDS patients, when the CD4 count drops below 50, CMV wakes up. It causes retinitis. It literally destroys the retina, leading to blindness or huge ulcers in the colon or pneumonia.
And for newborns.
It's the most common viral cause of birth defects in the U.S. We worry about rubella, but CMV is actually more common. It causes hearing loss, microcephaly, and an enlarged liver and spleen.
The treatment here is ganciclovir. Is that just a stronger acyclovir?
Similar mechanism, but stronger and much more toxic. Here's the catch. CMV doesn't have that specific thymidine kinase we liked so much in HSV.
Oh.
So acyclovir doesn't work well. We have to use ganciclovir, but the trade-off is that it hits the host bone marrow harder. It causes neutropenia.
So we saved the big guns for the serious cases. Before we leave the betas, briefly touch on HHV6. This is the fever then rash virus.
Yes, roseola infantum. Classic pediatric presentation. A baby gets a really high fever, 104, 105. Parents are terrified. Lasts for 3 to 5 days. Then dramatically the fever breaks and boom, a rash appears on the trunk.
So the rash is almost a sign of recovery.
Exactly. But that high fever spike is a major cause of febrile seizures, so it keeps ER doctors busy.
Moving on to the final herpes group, Gammaherpesvirinae. The text calls these the lymphoproliferative group.
Which is a fancy way of saying they infect white blood cells, specifically B cells, and make them grow uncontrollably. This is where we find Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV.
The cause of mono. But it works differently. It doesn't just kill the cell, it immortalizes it.
It's fascinating and frightening. EBV binds to the C3b receptor on a B cell. It enters and essentially hacks the cell's controls, forcing it to divide and proliferate. It turns the B cell into an antibody factory.
And that's why we use the heterophile antibody test to diagnose it.
Right. These immortalized B cells churn out all kinds of random junk antibodies. One of them happens to stick to sheep or horse red blood cells. That's the monospot test.
So if the patient's serum clumps sheep blood, it's EBV.
Exactly. If it doesn't, but it looks like mono, it's probably CMV.
Now, there is a visual trap here. The text shows a picture of atypical lymphocytes in the blood, figure 25.24. Since EBV infects B cells, I assumed these big weird cells were the B cells.
Everyone assumes that. But they are actually T cells. They are CD8 plus T cells, the cytotoxic killers. They are huge and misshapen because they are hyperactivated, fighting the war against the infected B cells.
So the symptoms of mono, the huge swollen glands, the sore throat, the fever, that's basically a civil war in your lymph nodes.
Exactly. It's the immune response that makes you feel awful.
But because EBV stimulates cell growth, it's also linked to cancer.
It was the first human virus linked to cancer. The text details Burkitt lymphoma, a jaw tumor in African children. The virus triggers a translocation of the c-Myc oncogene. It basically jams the accelerator pedal of cell division.
And in AIDS patients, we see oral hairy leukoplakia.
Which is exactly what it sounds like. White corrugated patches on the side of the tongue that you can't scrape off. It looks like ridges. It's an unchecked EBV replication shown in figure 25.23.
And finally, for the gammas, HHV8.
Kaposi sarcoma. Before HIV, this was very rare. But in AIDS, HHV8 causes these dark purple vascular tumors on the skin.
Okay, that's the herpes family. Alpha, beta, gamma, a huge amount of info. But we have to pivot hard for the last few minutes. We need to talk about the Poxviridae.
The pox viruses. Smallpox and molluscum contagiosum.
The text calls them the rule breakers. Why?
Well, think about everything we just said. DNA viruses replicate in the nucleus, right?
Right, that's where the DNA tools are.
Pox viruses don't. They replicate in the cytoplasm.
How? There's no machinery in the cytoplasm to transcribe DNA. How do they read their own code out there?
That's the rule-breaking part. Pox viruses are so massive, they're the largest viruses, brick-shaped and complex, that they carry their own factory. They pack a DNA-dependent RNA polymerase inside the virus particle.
So they don't need the nucleus.
They don't need it. They set up shop in the living room.
That is a huge biological flex. They are totally independent.
They are. And historically, the most important one is smallpox, or variola.
Which is the greatest success story in the history of medicine.
Without exaggeration, it's the only human disease we have intentionally eradicated from the planet.
The text lists a few reasons why we won that war, and I think it's important to understand why we could do it for smallpox but not, say, COVID or flu.
It was the perfect target.
Right.
First, no animal reservoir. It only infected humans.
So nowhere to hide.
Right. Second, it was stable. It didn't mutate constantly like the flu. And third, there were no asymptomatic carriers. If you had smallpox, it was obvious. You couldn't walk around spreading it unknowingly.
And, of course, the vaccine.
The vaccinia virus, which is actually cowpox. It's similar enough to train the immune system, but safe enough not to kill you. That's actually where the word vaccine comes from. Vaca means cow.
The other poxvirus mentioned is molluscum contagiosum, which sounds like a spell from Harry Potter.
It's much less traumatic. It causes these small, flesh-colored, wart-like bunks with a little dimple in the center. Umbilicated is the word the text uses. It's a nuisance, but it usually resolves on its own.
So zooming out on chapter 25, we have the herpes family, the masters of latency hiding in our nerves and immune cells. And we have the pox family, the brutes that bring their own factory to the cytoplasm.
It really highlights two different survival strategies: stealth and persistence versus complexity and independence.
I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning. We eradicated smallpox because it had nowhere to hide. But herpes.
Herpes hides in us. It weaves itself into the very biology of our neurons and our white blood cells. It raises a really difficult question for the future of medicine. How do you cure a virus that has learned to become a silent passenger in your own body?
Yeah.
We can suppress it with acyclovir, but eradicating it, that is a challenge on a completely different level.
Something to chew on. If you want to solidify those, go back to the text and look at the owl's eye for CMV and the dermatome map for shingles. Visualizing it really makes it stick.
Absolutely. The images in this chapter are high yield.
Huge thanks to the last-minute lecture team for making this deep dive possible.
And thank you for listening. Keep learning.
We'll catch you on the next one.